Anyway, our guest speaker tonight is Reagan Harris, and she is a wildlife conflict specialist, which I think is such a cool job. I'm sure we'll hear some fun stories. Um, Reagan is from Snohomish.
Snohomish. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, yes, born and raised, but came to the east side uh, to work with WDEFW after college. And anyway, I think she's going to have some wonderful stories for us. So I'm going to turn it over to her.
No picture.
Let's have a hand for our guest speaker.
Thank you, everybody. Really excited to be here tonight. Just talk with you guys a little bit about just kind of what we do in our jobs. It's definitely a career where I get a lot of questions from people, a lot of just natural curiosity. And so I'm always happy to kind of explain some of the things we do every day. I have a lot of photos in this PowerPoint. Some of them I'll explain, some of them I won't. If you have a question about any individual picture, feel free to interrupt me and ask what's going on with that photo if I forget. So I cover Spokane, Lincoln, and Whitman counties, based here out of Spokane. As Gary said, I am originally from Washington, but I got my bachelor's in wildlife resources from the University of Idaho. In the time between getting that degree and to the position where I am today, I had about 4 years total of experience just doing all kinds of different jobs, wherever the wind took me. Some of it was working on as a wildlife area technician, managing wildlife areas in both Washington and Idaho for recreation, as well as wildlife habitat. I did various research projects helping out with collecting data. One of the projects I worked on was doing greater sage grouse. A lot of it was just monitoring populations, trying to, study different wildlife behavior or habitat use. And then right before I got my job as a conflict specialist in Spokane, I did work for a couple years as a conflict technician with our agency, which is basically a conflict specialist, but with less responsibilities. So I'm not totally new to this position. I've been doing it for a little bit. So
I'll have water.
So this is I'll get to, we do a lot of moose work in Spokane. Sometimes we have to relocate them. This moose has quite a story behind her. We can probably talk more about it at the end. But she had a couple calves in a backyard.
Oh.
It was in an area where it was unsafe. The calves could not get out of the backyard because they couldn't jump the fence. And the house was surrounded by busy roads, country homes. So we didn't want to just open the gate and let them go because the chances are one of them might get hit. So we took the opportunity to immobilize her, as well as we had to hand capture this calf as well as another one, hand inject them so that they would be immobilized and transport them outside of town to a safer location. So wildlife conflict specialists are exactly what you would think they are. We are wildlife biologists whose focus is on conflict resolution. In a nutshell, that can be very broad. We do all types of different things, but if you can think of any sort of wildlife property damage, we probably do it. This is actually a relatively newer position with our agency. Our first conflict specialist in Washington State was hired back in 2013. Prior to that, most of our job responsibilities was housed within our enforcement program. So if you had an issue with, any sort of wildlife concern, most of the time it was an officer, a game warden that came out and helped you with it. But then in around 2013, even years prior to that, our agency did see that there would be a benefit from shifting some of those responsibilities to the wildlife program so that our officers could focus on catching the poachers and we could have this own dedicated position to working one-on-one with people and ultimately just providing a better customer experience for people who have these issues. Initially, most of our job responsibilities was working with commercial crop owners to resolve commercial crop damage. That has changed quite a bit. Over the years, we now are handling more and more problem wildlife and dangerous wildlife response, which I'll get into, but basically Those are just kind of different ways that we categorize calls that come into us. But with these evolution over time, we now have 17 full-time conflict specialists across the state, in addition to various conflict technician and conflict-related workers. As you'd expect, conflict goes hand in hand with population. So as human population increases, so does conflict. As Washington state population increases, the demand for more and more conflict specialists goes up. So this is part of our agency that we are continuing to actively expand when funding becomes available. So I could probably spend all day just going over every single scenario that I handle and how we handle it. I have a bedtime coming up here soon, though, so we're not going to do that. We can definitely go over case-by-case scenarios later if there's questions, but every single situation that we come at is unique. They all have their own variables. The way we respond, how to appropriately handle the situation varies. But at the end of the day, our main goal is to emphasize, which I'm sure a lot of you know, being, volunteering with Spokane Audubon, the Save a Bird program, the emphasis really is education. We try to, as much as we can, work with people, provide education, which goes hand in hand in tolerance. If I can help a landowner understand the situation better, understand why they're having issues, it helps them, appreciate why the animal's there and tolerate it better. I had a professor in college who very wisely told me early on that wildlife management is not managing wildlife, it is managing people. Which she was very right about that, especially when it comes to conflict. A lot of it is really, it's a people problem. The animals are just there. They're doing what they do. We need to learn to work with the people to manage that problem. So we do a lot with education, deterrence, non-lethal deterrence to resolve the problem in a, not a harmful way to the animal. And then from there, we can escalate it to, more intense measures like relocation, lethal removal, damage claims if necessary. But those, we try to keep those to be the exception. We don't want to do that every time. We want to try and resolve the issue with deterrence and education as best as we can. So on a day-to-day basis, the calls we get, the nature of the call will impact how we handle it. So you'll see referenced multiple times through this talk that living with wildlife. So if you haven't been to our website, we have a pretty intense website with like all kinds of good information. Part of that website, we have what's called Living with Wildlife Guides, which is just free to the public, standard advice for any sort of wildlife issue you may have. So if you can think of any species that could come into conflict, chances are we've got general standard advice that we have on our website that you can reference at any time to help you with that problem. We use that resource quite a bit, directing members of the public to view that information, just some self-help education. Sometimes it does require a more intense site visit with the person to try and resolve the issue. We can also do outreach and presentations. I do outreach frequently in like communities where we have an ongoing issue. So if they've got, coyotes that are causing, going after cats, or maybe they've got moose in the neighborhood, we can do one-on-one presentations with the community to try and help boost their education so that they can understand what's going on. Deterrence, as sky's the limit really with deterrence. There's all kinds of cool things on the market these days. If, it's all about being as unique and as possible. There's like scent deterrence, visual deterrence, sound deterrence. We try to use a lot of those to try and, change an animal's behavior if, on a short-term basis. Our conflict specialists, we sometimes will have some inventory of non-lethal deterrents that we can work with the public on loaning those out so that they can, on a short-term basis, maybe it just requires a week of a motion sensor light or something. So you put that up, maybe that scares the animal off and it fixes the problem, but not always. And when that doesn't work, we go to maybe those more invasive steps like relocation, removal, and damage claims. There's a couple big misconceptions in my opinion when it comes to our agency. One of them being, you see someone post online, Facebook, I'm having an issue with a raccoon, what do I do? Go to the comments, and most of the time I see someone comment, do not call Fish and Wildlife, they will just kill it. It's like, that's not necessarily true. I mean, we do lethally remove animals, but not all the time. So that's one big misconception. The other one is I get calls, I'm having issues with Fox. What can I do? And so I'll go through the phone call. I will provide as much advice as possible. I get to the end of the phone call and the person goes, I was hoping you would be able to relocate it. Is that an option? And so everyone thinks we can just, if you have an issue with an animal, we can come out, move that animal somewhere else. Maybe back in the day, we did a lot of that. We've tried to move away from that in recent years just because, again, population is increasing. You take that raccoon that's getting into your garbage, move it out to the woods, it goes to somebody else's house and starts getting into garbage there. So if it's, that individual is used to getting in the garbage, relocation is not going to fix that problem. It's just going to make it somebody else's. So we really, at least for the area I work in, relocation is saved for instances where it's a safety concern because the animal got into an area where it shouldn't be, which they have a tendency to do that. Moose, for sure, they'll start migrating through town. Next thing you know, they're on I-90. And you're like, that's not a good spot for you. We'll relocate there. Sometimes cougars and bears will do the same thing. They get into a place where they really shouldn't be, so we give them a free ride out of town. So I was saying we have problem wildlife and dangerous wildlife. Dangerous wildlife is basically all large predatory animals, and everything else kind of gets categorized in this umbrella of problem wildlife. So commercial crop damage is still one of the main things conflict specialists handle. Elk, deer, and turkey are the primary concerns when it comes to that. In the Spokane area, the majority of my damage is elk and some turkey in areas. But a lot of how we handle these issues, it's one-on-one. We work and build relationships with the people who are experiencing these issues to try and minimize damage as much as possible. All of it is kind of guided by Washington Administrative Code. So there are things we can do and there are things we cannot do when we're handling elk and deer. I'm not going to get into too much in the weeds in that, but a lot of it, it is very much working with the producers, the commercial crop producers to try and minimize. In the Spokane area, the main complaints with elk are typically we have a lot of issues with winter wheat this time of year. The ground is super soft. The wheat tastes delicious. And so they go walking through a field and, it's a very large animal walking through mud, just kind of smashes everything. So you'll be driving through even Whitman County and you'll see big trails going through wheat field. And you're like, that doesn't look very good. Yeah, it's because, 50 elk went and walked through there. Summertime as well, lentils and garbs for sure in this area. I love hummus, and so do the elk. They love to eat garbs. So we get a lot of complaints in the summertime about elk getting into those crops. We also deal a lot with sick, injured, trapped, and orphan wildlife, basically any wildlife in distress. In an urban area, of course, again, those complaints are going to go up. More people to see what's going on, more opportunities for the animals to get themselves into trouble. And so I would say most of the time we get these calls, a lot of it is handled through just advice to the person on the phone. People, you kind of underestimate when you're not as involved with wildlife, how the average person understands wildlife. So you think, oh, that's very obviously a bobcat. Well, people don't, they see a bobcat and they're like, that's a cougar, or, so it's just, people don't really have that education to understand. And so I will get calls and you talk with them on the phone, sounds like it's a big issue. Usually nature figures its way out and solves the problem. Like one example this summer, I got a call about a raccoon that was hanging out on a property all day, acting sick, maybe injured. They were concerned. So I go out to this property. Raccoon was exactly where they said it was. I show up and the raccoon was just laying on its back behind the shed, legs up in the air. And I'm like, well, that's kind of weird. And so I gave him a little bit of encouragement. And if you've seen raccoon videos online, sometimes raccoons just sleep like that. So that poor raccoon had found a great place to sleep. and I disturbed him. So I was like, go on. Yep, he was able to walk and wasn't sick at all. Just it was a great spot. And so we get those calls all the time. Wildlife in distress, sometimes they're not. Deer are one. We get a lot of issues in town. You might not be able to see with that photo, but it has a tomato cage wrapped right around his body. So yeah, sometimes those are really tricky to coordinate an agency response. If that deer is moving, it's gone. Like we might get a call a few days later and be like, hey, the deer is here. And then by the time you get to that property, gone again. So luckily we had a landowner in the area that sat there and watched that deer, followed it as it went through the properties. And because her mobility was impacted, but the concern was that if she jumped a fence or got up with some furniture, she could get tangled up and potentially injure herself, which would not be a good scenario for those fawns. So we luckily were able to immobilize her, remove that tomato cage, and off they went, happy and healthy. We get a lot of trapped wildlife too, especially with birds. I'm sure you guys get calls too. Birds coming down chimneys, birds flying through windows, like especially turkeys, breaking the windows and ending up inside the house. Sometimes, like with the scenario of this hawk here, flew into a warehouse that had the door open. That was an interesting one because they said there were 2 hawks that flew in. One got out, this one was stuck. Did everything they could to try and resolve the issue. They covered up all the windows, turned the lights off, had the big bay door open to try and let it leave. Come to find out, our biologist here, Matt Brinkman, he said it was a Cooper's hawk, which you guys would know more than me. I'm not the bird identification expert, but there was a nest out front that we believe was a red-tailed hawk nest, and we think what might have happened is this hawk got a little too close and that red tail swooped in, chased it into the warehouse. Red tail left, and that Cooper's hawk was like, no way am I leaving, I'm staying in here. If I go out there, I'm dead. So we released outside, wasn't injured, happy scenario. He's wicked good with the net, so he was able to catch it real fast. And then kind of the last scenarios we have is injured and orphan wildlife. Orphan wildlife is another one of those calls that we get a high volume of calls. Most of the time, the animal's not truly orphaned. Deer, raccoons, skunks, they are all notorious. They'll leave their young on their own to do their thing while the adults go off to feed, what have you. And so we have people that will see that, like there's a fawn in my yard, it's clearly abandoned or it's orphaned. No, it's not. It's just doing its thing, leave it be, it'll be okay. But sometimes they're not, like porcupines. Those are a species that they should never be without their mom. They stick pretty closely with it. This one was on its own for quite a while, so we were able to take it to rehab. Luckily, we had staff available that day to do it. Turns out it was actually suffering from toxoplasmosis, which is transmitted typically through domestic cats. So might have been the reason why it was on its own. But really the issue with injured and orphan wildlife is that we are limited on staff availability when it comes to these calls. We get a very large volume of them. Everybody wants to do good. Everybody wants to help the animals, get them to rehab. Sometimes that's not the best case scenario for the animal. Maybe we don't have the staff time available, which is where programs like Your Save a Bird is huge for us, because if it wasn't your volunteers that are going out to pick up these birds, it's mostly me responding to every single call. And on top of all my other responsibilities, it's not there. So we try to work a lot with people with advice. Maybe let nature take its course is what we should do. Maybe if it's a scenario where it really does need to go to rehab, we can authorize them to transport it there. Or if it's, severely injured, like deer, spend a lot of time putting down injured deer that have broken legs. Deer are not a candidate for a rehab. You get an adult deer in a rehab situation, they'll stress themselves to death. So there's no coming back from that. It's either we let nature take its course and it survives that injury. Maybe it's got a limp or walks on 3 legs. Or if it's not going to, we can euthanize it. Urban conflict kind of has its own little thing. So especially in Spokane, it's a very unique situation for the whole state. Kind of the species we have to deal with a lot in Spokane are moose and turkeys. We have all kinds of other species like raccoons, skunks. They all cause issues as well. I'll get to that in a second, but I kind of differentiate them from moose and turkeys because our response to those species are different. Moose and turkeys, it's a lot of providing education again to the public, helping people understand. I will go out personally and haze animals if they're in a location where either we want to deter them from coming around that area, or, like sometimes we'll have toms that will start going after children and we want to try and teach them a lesson, like stay away from the children. So we'll go out and try and haze them a bit to make them be a little bit more fearful of humans. And then, of course, last case is relocation, especially for those moose. If they get into an unsafe area, we don't want them getting hit. We don't want them getting into a situation where they potentially charge someone because they feel the need to. So we'll move them to a safer location. Now, for the rest of the animals, we call those like our nuisance species. And the reason we treat them differently is because with these species, raccoons, skunks, foxes, even coyotes to some degree, most of the time when we get calls, it's handled over the phone with living with a wildlife advice. If we do that, we provide them with options for deterrence, and that does not solve the issue. The landowner has the ability to hire out a certified trapper to lethally remove that animal. At the exception of, moose and turkeys, you can't do that because they're protected. With everything else, though, if they need to, they can go hire it out. It's usually through like a pest control company, or we call them wildlife control operators. They can come out, lethally remove the problem, which gives the landowner time to either fix the problem so that they no longer have issues, or maybe there's a problem with an individual, like one raccoon is really good at breaking into my chicken coop. I've tried everything I can to stop it, and that one keeps coming back, killing all my chickens. That might be a situation where if we lethally remove that one raccoon, problem might be resolved. So with a few exceptions, we will get involved in more rural situations where maybe there's not certified trappers available. We can provide equipment so people can trap on their own. Or sometimes if there's a public safety concern, that's still typically handled through our enforcement. So if it's safety, our officers will go out and handle it, but we can get involved too if needed. This fox was one that actually bit a person. Well, this one didn't. There was a group of foxes, and at least one of them was biting people. Next door neighbor was hand feeding. So because of that, they learned to associate that. And there were young children walking around the same property. Can't really risk those foxes going up and biting a small child. So unfortunately, because that neighbor was feeding the wildlife, which wasn't illegal, of course frowned upon, caused the issue for everyone else. Moving into more of our dangerous wildlife, which is kind of like our predatory wildlife, we consider those to be cougars, bears, and wolves. That can include other species. So moose have the potential to be dangerous wildlife. Coyotes can sometimes be dangerous wildlife, but in general, those are the three species we're talking about. So we will get a lot of sightings through our conflict staff. Our job a lot of time is to verify that those sightings are correct. Like I said, people sometimes are not very good at identifying. So you'll talk with someone, they're saying, I saw a cougar, and you're saying, explain it to me. It had a really short tail, like not a cougar. They have long tails. So trying to verify these sightings. We used to do more of this, but we've had some policy changes over the last few years where a lot of this is actually handled by customer service staff now. We usually only get involved if the customer service staff thinks that there's more of a concern that general advice isn't going to fix. So if they think, looking at the living with wildlife is not going to resolve the problem, they'll forward it on to us. All of the sightings that our conflict and enforcement staff is actually available to the public. So this is on our website. It's our predatory wildlife map. And so if you report a cougar, bear, wolf sighting to us, it goes through our system and it will pop up there if, cougar sighting, unable to verify, or if, there was a photo associated with that sighting, be like cougar sighting for sure verified. So, members of the public can go look at what's going on. I get a lot of questions of, should we even bother with reporting these dangerous wildlife sightings to you? Because sometimes we don't do much with them. It's just thanks for the report, provide you with general advice. And I say yes. On a couple different reasons. So if we have an issue with, like, say, a bear that got into a garbage can, we can look at the map and go, oh, there was 4 other instances in the recent weeks. So we might have a bigger issue than just one bear getting into one garbage can. We can look at things like that and assess if needed. The other thing is it's good, just being a neighbor. There's a lot of different options like Nextdoor app, Facebook groups where you can stay up to date with your neighbors. But this is another tool if you want to look and be like, oh, close by there was a wolf or something. Let's see. We do handle a lot of general predator concerns. So this is going to be more so, I was out feeding my cows and I saw a wolf up on the hillside, or I have a trail camera on my sheep pasture fence and a cougar went by. What do? We want to, it hasn't caused issues yet, but there's a potential that it could, come through and kill a sheep or a cow. What can we do? And so these instances, sometimes it's over the phone providing advice. Sometimes it is a site visit to, advise the person on how they can change like their livestock husbandry to prevent issues, or even deploying deterrence so that we can prevent any further issues or future issues. Depredations are also a big part, what most people think of when it comes to predatory wildlife. So depredation is a predatory wild animal killing or injuring domestic animals, so livestock or pets. So when we get reports of, animal pet was killed by something, what do? Those require an in-person agency response. We do go out there. We do a full investigation to determine what did actually kill the animal. Most predators have their own unique, general, like cougars have their own signature attack patterns. So do coyotes, bears, what have you. And so we can look at the carcass, we can look at it around the scene and determine, what actually did kill the animal. And from there, we can prescribe to the person how to prevent future interactions. Depending on the species, we might have to take lethal action. Sometimes with certain predators, if they kill one animal and it's super easy for them, you kill a sheep. Why would you waste your time killing deer when you can take a sheep down, no problem? So we can tend to get repeat offenders. Well, they'll start killing all those sheep, then they'll hop to the next property. They'll start killing all those sheep because they've learned. So we have the authority. We can go out and lethally remove them if it's depending on species protections. Like wolves are state listed species, so it's not as simple as just go out and remove. We have a lot more rules and hoops that we got to jump through for those. Property damage outside of livestock depredations. This is in particular for bears. We get a lot of bear complaints. They're coming out of their winter torpor, especially in the springtime. They're very hungry and they are very, very lazy. So they will kill animals. They are hunters, but to them, getting into a garbage can, getting into a freezer, or even just getting into a chicken coop. I've had them get into chicken coops and you think they'd go after the chickens. Nope, they're just going after the chicken feed. But they will kill the chickens too. It's super easy pickings for them. So we spend a lot of time in the spring handling these bear conflicts. I don't handle as much in my area, but definitely in the area surrounding me, there's quite a bit of conflict. So we'll work with the landowner to try and address these attractants so that we can stop this from happening in the future, use some deterrence if needed. So this freezer was a situation I dealt with a couple years back. I had, prior to this photo being taken the year before, I had been out to this property, same situation happened. Bear got into it. I worked really hard with her to clean up her porch. She had all kinds of stuff out there, which was attracting the bear. So the next year, situation's still there. The food is still there. Of course, the bear knows it was there last year and it got some food, so it came back. Her solution, which was a good thought, was to put this bar in front of the freezer. That, if the bear can't get into it, problem solved. I appreciate it. That's honestly, with any standard bear, there's a potential that could have worked, but this bear, it knew at that point. So it knew it could get the food if it tried hard enough. And the other issue was it didn't stop the door from opening completely. So if bears can get their claws into any crack and just pull as hard as they can, they do it with, windows, car windows. If you leave your car window cracked a bit and they can get their claws in there and just pull until the window shatters. Same thing, just pulled, broke that door off, smashed it, getting into the freezer. So they can be pretty ambitious when they really want to. We, aside from all of the problem wildlife and dangerous wildlife, we still do quite a bit helping out other programs within our agency. And on top of that, our responsibilities still overlap quite a bit with other personnel. So I kind of like to think of conflict specialists as sort of the bridge between our enforcement officers and our other biologists, like our district biologists who are in charge of, more of the hunting season settings. Our responsibilities overlap quite a bit. I work a lot with our enforcement team on moose issues. I work a lot with our wildlife biologists. Sometimes they'll help with, sick or injured animals when time permits if I'm not available. So at the end of the day, it does vary depending on where you're at in the state. But at least in my area, we are one big team. We all work together to get things done. And so there's quite a bit of overlap with us where we can work together, opportunities for that. We also work with a lot of other wildlife projects. So if we have someone that's doing a research project and they request, access to a private property to do some sort of activity, or they need biological samples, so like hairs, scat, tissue samples, or even just population counts, a lot of the times we're kind of the go-to because we spend a lot of time out there. We are in contact with a lot of wildlife. We also will occasionally do pelt sealing, which is the responsibility of our district biologist. So every time a cougar, bobcat, or otter is harvested in Washington, that animal is required to come through us to be checked first when it'll get a seal on it. And so if our district biologists are not available, sometimes conflict specialists will do things like that. And then lastly, season setting, we'll work with our district bios. So if they're, looking at maybe changing our hunting seasons a little bit, we can provide input on, if we're having an area where there's a lot of conflict, say with elk, we can make recommendations like, hey, maybe we should make some changes here, increase some hunter opportunity, so that we can, at the end of the day, increase hunter harvest, but at the same time, resolve some of those conflict issues. And so one of the main questions is, what does a conflict specialist do in their day-to-day? What do we do? It varies, and it varies a lot across the state. We are very blessed that we live in a state that is very biologically diverse. We have all kinds of habitats, ecosystems, wildlife. So the issues that I handle in my district are completely different than is handled on the west side of the state. So kind of some interesting things to look at with this map. This came out of an exercise we did a couple years back where we just polled the conflict specialists, like, what are the top 3 species that you handle? There's really no data to back up like, oh, I definitely spent this many hours on this species, so I know for sure elk is my number 1. It's more so just like we feel like we spend a lot of time working with elk, so we'll put that as number 1. But if we look at the west side of the state, it's very carnivore heavy. So they spend a lot of time working with bear and cougars with some elk damage. It's similar here in our eastern region, which is where Spokane is located, except we, instead of doing a lot of cougar, we handle a lot of wolf conflict. Elk is still a number 1, and bear as well. Compare that to the north and south central parts of the state. They're actually more herbivore heavy than they are carnivore heavy. And that's just because they do have carnivore populations. It's just not like it is over here. They have more so crop damage, not necessarily the cougars and the bears, wolves getting into livestock. I'm kind of actually the black sheep of our region here. I go against the trend in a lot of different ways. So north and south handle a lot of wolf and bear conflict. I have like 1 wolf pack in my area, so I don't deal with a whole lot of wolf conflict. I have some bear habitat. We get some calls, but not nearly as much as they get north and south. Number 1 I handle is for sure moose. I deal with a lot of moose issues and try to work with landowners on resolving that. Elk damage is still pretty high in my district. And then I'd say third to that is just really deer, mostly like injured deer. Get a lot of injured deer reports. You could potentially throw turkeys in there too. We get a lot of turkey complaints as well. And so this is just to give you kind of an idea of the calls I'm receiving. This is no way indicative of the amount of time I actually spend on these projects or calls. This is just a total tally of the calls I received in 2025 up until last week. So some calls are quick over the phone, 5 minutes, provide advice, handled. Sometimes it's like, an injured deer I have to go put down, might take an hour or 2 of my time. Other situations, it might be pretty extensive project, could require a lot of time, multiple visits with the landowner, phone calls, planning. So again, that's just meaning, this isn't proportional to how much time I spent. It's just the number of calls I receive from the public through the calendar year. And I tried to make this as simple as possible. I made problem wildlife is just moose, turkey, coyote, deer, and raptor. Of course, the cougar, bear, and wolf is dangerous. Any other species goes into that nuisance wildlife category unless it's injured. So I receive a lot of problem wildlife complaints. The main attributor to that is moose. I think this year alone, I've handled up to 70 moose complaints. And that's not even all of them. Some of them I didn't count because it was like the same individual within 3 houses all called in by the same day. So like there was one moose up north. That morning I got a call from one person. Later that day, their neighbor called in as well. And then the next morning, the other neighbor called in. So it was like, we'll just lump that as one call. Injured wildlife is also big. Main point of that one is deer. It's injured deer. I get a lot of injured deer reports. But the other noticeable thing is depredations. 2% of my calls are actually depredation. So I get about 12% carnivore calls, but only 2% of those did the animal actually kill livestock or a pet. So it happens less often, which is a good thing. It happens less often than you'd think. And so there's also seasonal variation to this as well. Animals have their calendar they follow, and because of that, our calendar also shifts. So different times of the years, I'm working on different things. Early winter, January, February is typically my slow season. My main complaints are usually crop damage, particularly haystacks if there's snow on the ground. When other food sources are not available, deer, elk, and turkeys start hitting those haystacks pretty hard. Turkeys are also in their winter flocks. They're very noticeable. They're pooping everywhere. I get a large number of complaints from people in town saying, we got to do something about these turkeys. But in that downtime, because our call volume is lower, a lot of animals are migrated out of the area for the winter, or they're in their winter torpor, so they're just not causing issues. I work a lot more on outreach, doing any projects that I've had going on. But as we move into springtime, those bears are waking up. We start getting that rash of bear calls and complaints. So I'm handling those, April timeframe. As we move into the spring and animals are being born, of course, that's when the orphan wildlife calls start coming through. And basically from, late May all the way through the rest of the summer, it's a lot of calls like, there's a raccoon, what do I do about it? It's like, calm down, it's okay. We're going to be okay. Once we hit midsummer, that's when we start getting a lot of moose complaints. It's usually beginning of July. The heat wave hits. Those moose, their way of handling that heat is to move into people's yards. Woody can attest to this, they don't handle heat well. So when they're in this area, it's 90 plus degrees. The best thing for them is to go sit in front of somebody's sprinkler. We even had a moose this summer it was early morning, super cool. We had to move her. We darted her. It was like a cul-de-sac. She walked around the entire cul-de-sac, and there was one sprinkler running, and she saw that sprinkler and she walked right towards it, got in front of the sprinkler, laid down right in front of it. She's like, this is where I'm going to take my nap. Of course you are. So the other thing on top of that is summer, their food sources are going to be dried up. So their natural food sources, the grasses, the shrubs, not as great, but in our yards, most of us have irrigation. So we've got nice lush lawns, we've got ornamental shrubs, trees, which are very well hydrated and basically a buffet for the moose. And so they figure that out pretty quickly. They can come hang out in the sprinklers, they can eat off the trees, and there's no need to be concerned for anything else because that's all you need. There's also crop damage is high that time of year as they're getting ready to harvest lentils and garbs. That's when the elk love to get through those garbs. Moving into fall, we have that time of year when deer, elk, moose, porcupines, they're all in their breeding season. So they start to move around a little more, and I get a lot of injured wildlife complaints. And on top of that, the bucks, they've got one thing in mind. They're, mad at the world, and so they're picking fights with everything, both animate and inanimate, getting wrapped up in hammocks, getting wrapped up in fences. you name it, they'll go tussle with it with their antlers, and next thing you know, they're all wrapped up and they're not in a good situation. So we handle a lot of injured wildlife and distress calls. Turkeys are starting to get into their large flocks again, so those complaints are starting to come through. Sometimes bear issues as they're getting ready for winter. I don't have that so much in my area in the fall. But then once we get into the November, December timeframe, things are cooling off, call volume drops down significantly. It's back to continuing with the turkey issue, more crop damage with those winter crops, and right now the ground isn't frozen, so elk are walking straight through a field and just creating a huge mass as they do, and then more outreach. And so that is kind of as best as I could, summation of what conflict specialists do. I should have put the phone number up on the board, but I would say if you ever have an issue with any sort of wildlife, you don't know how to handle it, one of the best things that you can do is reach out to our Spokane regional office. We have a great staff of customer service team that are able to direct your call to where it needs to be. So if, it could be as anything as minor as, I saw a skunk and I just seemed a little questionable. I don't know what to do with it. No call is too little. Feel free to reach out because you never know. It could be actually something going on. And so they can help direct where it needs to be. And so sure, we have time for questions, right? I was going to say no questions.
Question about urban coyotes. I assume some of them have learned where to find garbage and stray cats, and that sort of thing. But they must be denning somewhere, especially if they're seen frequently in one specific area. If a den is identified, is that something that anybody would want to deal with, or do we just let nature take its course, let it stay under that barn, wherever it's living?
Sure. So the question was urban coyotes, if we find a den somewhere, is there something that we could do about it, or do we let nature take its course? Generally, disturbing a den is kind of frowned upon just for humane reasons. Those animals are orphaned, or not orphaned. They're dependent. They're not doing anything wrong. So we try to discourage as much as possible of, messing with those dens at that time of year. If we do have a scenario, so most of the time when it comes to urban coyotes, our agency doesn't do a lot handling them other than outreach, and that's simply for the sake of, one, they are an unclassified species. So again, they fall into that category of raccoons, skunks. You have the right to lethally remove them. It is legal. So it is legal if you want to, go out and shoot a coyote, as long as you have your small game license, or if they're causing property damage, that falls into a different category. But where was I going with that? Yeah, so we don't have the staff time to devote to all these urban. So we work a lot with education, working with deterrence, helping people understand. You can potentially hire it out to come out and trap and remove them, especially if those adults are causing issues to the point where you cannot let them on the property, because let's say we don't have this happen very often. It has been kind of increasing on the west side of the state, but they're going after people and trying to bite them. Now, in that scenario, if you have to remove all of the coyotes from the pack, the humane thing would be to remove those pups, because you're orphaning them. So they're just going to die a slow death at that point. But all of that to say, it is discouraged to mess with a den. Technically, I don't think it's illegal if you take humane measures, but it is discouraged.
So just a quick clarification. Someone can remove, let's say, the den or the coyotes if it's on their property. Is that correct?
So
and let me just provide some
go for it.
Context. I'm involved with Friends of the Bluff, which is 600 acres of conservation land along the High Drive bluff. And so we have coyote dogs off leash
conflicts. So I just want to make sure that we know what you can do in that case if there's a conflict.
Yep. So my counter to that is we have a leash ordinance in Spokane, so your dog should not be off leash. That goes with all wildlife issues. People say, a moose, I was walking down the road and moose went after my dog. I'm like, was your dog on a leash? No. I was like, well, your dog was supposed to be on a leash, right? So that could have been avoidable. So number one, you should have your dog on a leash because that is not our law. That is the county law. Legally at this time, that could always change in the future. Yes, you can lethally remove a coyote when it's on your property. You can't go onto a public piece of property where hunting is not permitted and remove them. You can't go onto somebody else's property where you don't have permission to hunt them and remove them that way. So yeah, if they are on your property, technically you could, as long as you are outside of a shooting restricted zone. So if you're inside city limits or an area where shooting is not legal, then no, you cannot.
A question from the Zoom audience. A person asks, they're curious if red fox in Spokane County is considered to be a native fox, and if so, what's the local subspecies or possibly feral non-native, such as a fox farm escapee?
Yeah. So red fox are a native. Sometimes we'll get some color variants. So we had a dark one running around last year. We got a couple reports of it. It was pretty cool. We don't have any fox farms around here, so maybe there was back in the day a fox farm. There's some genetics left over from that. But basically any fox that is in this area should be a native species unless there's the potential that it has bred with a domestic dog. I don't know of any instances where that happens. There's been some suspicious cases where you're like, that's a weird looking fox. So you can, hypothesize maybe it was, mingling with somebody's small dog and it turned out looking a little weird. But yeah, red fox are a native species in Washington. Marmots, they're the best. What about marmots? Disrupt. Yeah. So that's one of those species that they're the unclassified. You can hire the trapper. The unfortunate thing with Spokane is a lot of Spokane is built on really good marmot habitat. And it's the same thing with ground squirrels. The old tale of I've got ground squirrels in my field, I got to go out and shoot them every day. As long as that habitat's there, the marmots are going to be around. They're very prolific. They breed well. They can migrate quite a ways. So you can go through, remove every single marmot from your property. You're going to have more come back probably the next year. So your best thing to do is try to minimize the habitat as best as possible. It's easier said than done. One thing is don't build any natural looking rock formations. So people they love rock formations. People go, I want to build a nice retaining wall. It's going to be natural rock, nice crevices everywhere. Marmots love that. So don't do that. It's financially, it gets to the point where, yeah, if it's causing a lot of damage, you can go out and remove them. But save that for a time where it's, less expensive for you to trap and remove than it is for you to live and deal with the problem. They do. They do. And so I've heard things like I had one person say they had residents that took those pool noodles and somehow attached them to the bottom of their car. I never saw it, so I have a hard time picturing it myself, how they did it, but I think what they were aiming at was trying to get those gaps that they would jump into, or potentially just doing it away so that they couldn't get under the car. Yeah, it's a tricky thing. You can look into different scent deterrents. those are all short-term lived because over time they'll get used to it and you got to reapply. But there are things like you can do. Always recommend if you got a garage, use that garage as much as you can. Not all of us are blessed to have a garage. I don't. Oh, yep. Yes. Yep. Yeah, and that we get that a lot, right? Could you trap and remove them? Yeah, you could. They can migrate quite a ways. So even if we went through and removed every single marmot, they're going to come back. So they're going to be there. It's one of those situations where you can get creative with things, come up with different ideas on how to prevent them from getting into your car. It just takes a little bit of creativity.
I have a Zoom question. If you could speak about sick deer and concerns regarding chronic wasting disease.
Sure. So, I mean, the good news is this is our second year of surveillance with chronic wasting disease. So, so far, our detection, we increased our surveillance this year for the whole region to try and get a better feel of how prevalent it is. I think we've had so far with this hunting season 2 more additional confirmations tested by us. I think also Spokane Tribe might have had a 3rd one as well, or they had 1, making 3 total from what we know of. So it's still early to tell. Seems like we might still be in the early stages of it. It's looking good right now. It's not like we're testing every single deer and they're coming back sick. So that's kind of promising. I don't know if they had a certain direction that person was hoping for when they were wanting information on CWD.
Do you get many calls about bats? Do you get many calls about bats?
Yes, especially in the summertime. One of the things that, sorry. So do we get a lot of questions about bats? We get a lot of questions about bats. Both if you live in an old house, quite frequently people will be like, I got bats roosting in my attic or my walls. What do we do about it? Or I found a bat inside my house, which sometimes that's a symptom of them roosting inside the attic somewhere and they work their way in. We get a lot of calls in like early August of bats ending up in weird places, showing up on the ground. I had one guy that was like, we were sitting on our porch and a bat just came out of nowhere and landed on the ground. So we threw it in a bucket and then another one came through and did the same thing, but it got away and now the bat's dead. And it's like, yeah, so the problem is you had a bat pup. At that age, they're learning to become independent. They're not the greatest at flying, so they're still figuring things out. They end up in weird places like next to a door at a stoop. And then they kind of just hang out there until the next day. They're like, this is where I will be. Or they end up on the ground. And when they end up on the ground, a lot of pups can't fly. They're grounded. So if you see a bat on the ground, that is one of the few times that it is recommended. If you feel safe doing it, trying to, get it in a box or use really thick gloves to pick that up, get it to a higher elevation. But that's basically what happened. That guy is, landed on the ground and that bat was stuck and he was trying to do good, thought it was maybe sick, but it was just a poor little pup. So yeah, August timeframe, yes, for sure. Lots of calls.
Do you get a lot of calls about birds flying into windows?
So I'm surprised I don't. I think a lot of that is kind of handled through our customer service staff. Sometimes if it's, a stunned bird, I think our customer service team does direct a lot of those, birds flying into windows to your volunteer program. So I had, turkeys will do it. They usually go straight through because they're big birds. That's about it though.
Yeah, our Save a Bird team does get them, and we are trying to promote bird window collision prevention systems, and we have a lot of information on our website about that, and we're trying to get the word out. So
do you get some complaints in the springtime of certain birds intentionally flying into windows because they're seeing their reflection, like robins, and hitting their reflection because they're like, who's this dude? This is my area. So we get those complaints sometimes. How do we resolve that? Which is usually directing to anti-collision. If you really want to go an extra step, remove that tree that's sitting in front of your window so that they're not sitting right. I have it happen in my house too. Robin just comes and starts hitting all the windows.
So just an addendum to the bird strike collision thing. I was recently helping with putting some window deterrents up. And the biggest issue with the windows is when there are two windows on a corner or an area where there's windows on both sides and the birds see through.
Yes.
That's where you get your most strikes.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. If you've got windows like that, that's really to focus on.
Question, do you have any data on wind farm strikes, bird kills with wind farms? I understand that's supposed to be some sort of a threat, and I would think the industry may be obligated to report that, or do they report that, or do you have any data on that?
Yeah, so the question is, do we have data to for wind farms and bird strikes? I would say probably yes, we have them somewhere. I'm not the keeper of those records. I usually don't receive them. If it's a federal migratory species, I'm sure all of that gets reported to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We might not be so much the keeper of that. But when there is a proposal that goes out for wanting to put in a wind farm somewhere, our biologists are, not me, our other biologists are very heavily involved in that process, providing recommendations of, no, we cannot do it in this area because there is some species that is not doing great and we don't want to have collisions, or maybe it's in an area where we don't have a lot of, really sensitive species. And so conflict potential is kind of minimum. So different, it might be more U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that's receiving that main data that you're asking about. But we do have some information, I'm sure.
Another Zoom question. Are coyotes territorial? Will a lone coyote who passes through our property deter new ones? And are we better not to remove it? And they have 10 acres.
That is a great question. I love that question because the answer is yeah. If you have a coyote that is well behaved, I tell people this all the time. They're like, there's a coyote and it has to go. We have dogs on the property, livestock. I can't have this here. So you're better off leaving that coyote there if it's not causing any issues. They are territorial. Not every individual is going to go after livestock or pets. Some do. But if you have one that is a good actor and leaves your pets, et cetera, alone, that's one that's better off being left. One example I can give is I had someone down south in Whitman County. They have big livestock operation, never had issues with coyotes ever for a long time. And that's exactly what the advice they were given was the coyotes were behaving themselves, leave them be. And then just over time, those probably you died off, migrated, whatever it was. And they have maybe a new set of coyotes that have come in. And one of them is a little bit of a killer, likes to go after small livestock. So like, oops. So those are situations where maybe removing an individual, if it is causing conflict with killing livestock, might help with changing their patterns. But if they're being good actors, I'd say for sure leave them alone. Yes. Can I speak to avian influenza and the prevalence in this area? Up to this point, we have not had any large die-offs. Fingers crossed that it doesn't keep going. We've had reports here and there. Landowner goose fell out of the sky into their backyard. That's kind of suspicious, acting really weird. Take it in. For sure, avian influenza. I think we're at, I can't give you the number exactly. It's like above 5 or so. It's all on our website right now. Spokane County, it's mostly Canada geese that are carrying it at this time. We've had a few other birds that have been a little suspicious. We had a duck that came through and it was acting a little weird, but we didn't test it because it wasn't in contact with humans. So at this point, if a bird is not in contact with humans, it's displaying symptoms of avian influenza. A lot of those times we just, in the effort of saving money, we're deciding where we're actually going to test. If we have it confirmed in that area already, we might not be doing as much testing. So yeah, Canada geese, we've had a few great horned owls that also turned up dead, tested positive. So It's around. We continue. It seems like it's about every 10 days, which coincidentally happens to be the time period for humans. If you're going to get symptoms, it's within 10 days. So it's about every 10 days that I get another call of a bird being sick. One of the big things, so I know you guys deal with a lot of injured geese or potentially sick. Well, the main thing is they just act weird. Sometimes they're just not with it. Sometimes they are with it, but they're doing weird things with their heads. Another thing it's not, you can't use it every time, but they sometimes their eyes will be cloudy. So you're like, are they blind? No, that's a symptom of it. And so most of the birds that I handle that have avian influenza, a lot of them, their eyes are cloudy, and you're like, not good. Doesn't necessarily mean it. The nice thing is that it's a relatively low risk as long as you're not prolonged exposure or immunocompromised. So if you do have concerns, like you might have potentially been exposed, we always recommend reach out to Spokane Regional Health Department and your doctor. Were you in close contact with one? Oh, I know exactly which one you're talking about. Oh.
One more Zoom question is that why are turkeys protected?
Yes. Next question. Turkeys were introduced for hunting. So they are currently classified as a game species. A lot of our game species, they do have restrictions on how many you can take in a year. Turkeys are still that way. We have made some advances over the years as the populations have continued to increase. We've increased limits, so now we can harvest in the fall time for turkeys if you're in an area where it is legal to do so. So at this point, it's all because they're classified as a game species. That could always change in the future. It's a lot of paperwork, a lot of meetings, but that could always change.
In your experience, what kills more deer? Cars or predators?
So it was, in my opinion, what kills more deer in our area. I think there's probably been a lot of studies that have gone into deer mortality. Like I know for sure I saw one coyote mortality study in an urban setting. It's vehicles, it's human. One of the reasons they are in town is because there is less predation. They're not stupid. They know if they move into town, there might not be the risk of being killed by a coyote or a deer. So that is part of it. I will tell you, I have seen a lot of injured, like largest bucks I've ever seen in my life that have either been hit by a vehicle. Biggest one I've ever put down actually impaled itself on those wrought iron fences, which are one of the worst fences you could ever put up, but they got the spikes on top. It went to jump it and just right down on top of it. So I would say they can do quite well in town. I'm sure there's a study somewhere that can actually provide numbers, but I would say most likely vehicle cause mortality, or human rather. Sure.
I want to know what happens if a deer impales itself on the fence and dies in your yard? What do you do then? Do you guys come and bury it, or do you have to kill it?
Yeah. So let's see. It's a tricky thing. Yes. So if a deer impales itself, or let's just say it dies on your property, what do you do about it? We don't have a lot of time and resources to devote to that, of course. So it is a case-by-case situation. If it's person can't handle it, they're old, elderly, they don't have people available to come help them with removing it. They can't. Sometimes there are companies out there, like some of our wildlife control operators will do deer removal, but it can be pricey. So if it's someone that is lower income, can't afford it. Sometimes if we have time available, we'll go out and handle it. But in general, in Washington state, it is unfortunately the landowner's responsibility. So if you live on a property with acreage, the answer is going to be, drag it out somewhere for it to decay, bury it, whatever you got to do. City, it is a case-by-case scenarios, but it's still kind of the same. It is up to landowners' responsibility. I will add though, you asked about predators in town. We get, especially in the wintertime, a lot of complaints of cougars killing deer in town. And it's like, I went out this morning, there was a dead deer on my property, like right there. And I'll go out if I have the time and I'll look at those to verify it was a cougar, especially if it's an area where it's unsafe. Most of the time they're actually killed by coyotes. It's a different thing. It's like a complete mess. The animal isn't really drug off. Sometimes coyotes will attack the same region that a cougar does, but when you get to actually looking at the injuries, it's very different from a cougar. So it does happen, especially if there's an area where deer are congregating, they'll figure that out pretty quickly. Predators, if they're in the area, and they'll come through and pick them off if they get that chance.
Well, thank you so much, Reagan. That was wonderful. Fabulous stories. Want to give Reagan our calendar. It's Christmas time. We still have, what, 25 calendars left? Something like that. So if you want a calendar, we have some. Anyway, local photographers, some great photos, great phenology information, when birds will be coming in the area. So anyway, thank you so much, Reagan. I hope you enjoy it, and thanks everybody for participating tonight.